Listen, folks, it is so great to be down here, and thank you so much for coming out. I know how busy everyone is, and we're inside, and look at the sunshine and the boats. It's an amazing location, and I really appreciate you coming out. As the invitation, I think, mentioned, we're in a year of intense strategy. It's not that we haven't been doing strategy. From my first couple of months at CMC, we immediately started to assess what was the next plateau that we could look for and envision and scale those rocks. I think it was in December of that year that I said, you know, really successful capital campaign. We hadn't raised nearly enough money for financial aid and scholarships to expand the tremendous opportunities that our students have to get prepared for their world of opportunities. And the board said, okay, Hiram, you know, let's go raise another $100 million for financial aid and scholarships. And within 2 years, we'd done that, and we're now over $200 million. And so we're always thinking about what's going on in the world. What's the role of higher education? What is our place on the higher ed landscape? And where can we make a difference? Where can we lead by example? And this is a really big opening for us to think about what are the core themes that we really want to work on. Freedom. The CMC has always been about education that is designed to help create a free and sustain a free society. Opportunity. How do we actually align the education we're providing, the learning that we're investing in, with what the world will need from this generation of students? And preparation. What is that combination of rigorous learning and leadership education that we can fuse together and continually iterate and improve that's going to be the most powerful kind of learning environment for our students? The classroom, to be sure, the co-curricular spaces, the residential experience, and all of that together. And one of these themes I'd like to talk about tonight, which is freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of inquiry, freedom to listen to opposing viewpoints. And I'd like to set some of that discussion in the context of, let's look out at the world, what's going on around us. So I'm going to start tonight with 2 quotes, okay? And I want you to see if you can tell me what person or persons may have said these things. It's kind of a little trivia quiz. All right, so first quote. All of the individuals I admire and respect are the first to acknowledge that theirs is not the last word. They are constantly seeking out information that disproves their opinion. Because if they are wrong, they don't want to be wrong for a minute longer. All right, second quote. All right, this person's talking about what he calls, first I'll give you a little clue. First quote's from a woman, second from a man. This person is talking about a concept that I had never heard expressed before I read this. We all know about straw man. This person is advocating for what he calls a steel man concept. Well, you could have a steel woman concept. He said, it's the opposite of the straw man because it's the strongest form of what your opponent believes, your opponent in argument. I want to show people that the strongest form of an opinion that they disagree with, I think that's what inspires more respect and civility, and what eliminates bad habits and bad faith arguments. Who said these things? Anyone take a guess? What do you think of these quotes?
Tremendous. Pretty good.
Forceful, wise, apropos, like relevant to everything that we're dealing with in our society today. I'll get back to that in a moment. Well, there's no way you could have guessed, because these quotes each come from 2 of our current students. And they happen to be the 2 fellows in the Athenaeum this year. And no one fed them these quotes. No one coached them up on these quotes. These are the quotes now available on our website if you look at their interviews. These are two tremendous young people. Now, where are these folks from? It's kind of interesting. Well, the first quote is from Hamza Srikanth from Bangalore. And the second quote is from a young man, Bruno Young, who's from Seal Beach. Okay? Think about it. Now, why do I start with these quotes? I start with these quotes because it's the evidence of where we want to be as a college. It's proof of our pudding. It is our powerful counterexample. Where else in U.S. higher ed, in an uncoached interview, are you going to hear quotes like that? I don't know. Sadly, I'm not so sure. I'm sure there's some great young women and men leaders out there who are thinking and saying those things, but it is no accident that these quotes come from two of our students. It's no accident that these quotes come from two of our Ath Fellows. Okay? The Athenaeum, the Temple of Wisdom that is meant to not only present a diversity of viewpoints, but to socialize them, to break bread over them, to occasionally, for those who are old enough, to have a glass of wine around them. Now, why are these quotes, why is evidence of the growth and strength and leadership of these two students so important in today's world? Well, there are a couple of things that come to my mind. First is that in higher education, I think that we've all become way too solipsistic in the way we talk about our institutions. Okay? I'm talking about myself and my peers, my group. Okay? In alumni events like this, with parents and alumni here and some other folks, it's very common for me to stand up and give you a list of accomplishments. But listen to the way the list of accomplishments get expressed and what they start to indicate. So I say, oh, we have a 9% acceptance rate. That otherwise stated, we have a 91% rejection rate. That's supposed to be a source of prestige. Well, that's a pretty perverse source of prestige, right? It means that there are 91% of our applicants who may have wanted to come to CMC, and you should know that 57% now of those accepted actually show up, which is by far the highest yield number in our peer group. There are very few universities that exceed that in the United States. Or I say, gosh, we've created a whole bunch of new centers and programs. Or, gosh, I say, we've raised tens of millions, over $100 million last year. Or I say, look at what's happened in the Forbes ranking or the Wall Street Journal's ranking, okay? All of that, folks, it's all self-referential. It all tells you about what we're bringing to the campus. It doesn't tell you about what we're contributing, does it? And if our college was founded on the principle, what Mabel Benson in 1957, after a decade of experience, called the original idea, a rationally balanced education to prepare this generation of students for tomorrow's world of affairs. From its founding, our college had an external vantage point. The young vets who came to Claremont in 1946, as Ken Starr has more eloquently written, didn't come to start a college. They didn't come because they were interested in the college. They came and stood online in that little rocky valley where it wasn't even a school. I mean, one of the first applicants showed up and couldn't even find anyone who knew what was happening. Benson was out hiring the faculty at Harvard. They came because they were there to pursue their dreams, to be someone, somebody, something important. The school is a vehicle. It's not an end. And when we talk about it in this context, we have to take stock of what's happening in our world and what's happening in higher ed as a result. So let me just reflect on that. And I'm sure you have your own views of this, and I encourage you to express them here tonight and to add and subtract from my own. I know everyone here is probably, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, very concerned about what we tend to refer to as polarization. You just have to be. I don't know anyone really who isn't, unless they really don't care about that, or they become so jaded and cynical that it's just about whether they can win. Okay? So I suppose there are some subsets of people in our society that aren't so concerned about it. Why are we so increasingly polarized in our politics? I mean, I think that's a really important question to ask. And Professor Shields is here, and he's doing this amazing study of counties in the United States that went to Trump that had been historically Democratic. So it'd be great for you to talk to him about his insights from these amazing interviews that he's done in cities around these really interesting locations around the country. But why is it happening? Like, why is it? I think we tend to look at this very superficially as if it's only about our politics, and we fail to see these major, powerful forces that are having centrifugal effects, that is, the effects that are dividing us further. And I could list a number of them, and you can explore them. Globalization is supposed to flatten the world, eliminate borders, eliminate, all this, and actually it's been bumpier than maybe what we expected. Technological innovation, again, a great equalizer. Not so clear that it's had that effect, that what's supposed to have connected us, social media, the ability to have, an immediate connection with people all over the world, well, combination of algorithms and also the way we use it, are we only being drawn to those people that, again, we feel comfortable with or who agree with our point of view? Are we really engaging in a serious way through that media? Not clear. There are many structural reasons that, or maybe one might say, issues, trends, urbanization, driving people from rural communities to urban ones. Secularization, which has become a big divide in the country between those who actually practice a religion and those who don't. Gerrymandering. When you look at presidential electoral maps and you look at the percentages of counties or districts that go 20% for one candidate or another, it's a pretty sharp increase over the last 30 years. The way we fund schools, parents that have some wealth and have some choice, what do? You go to a high-tax public school district or you go to private school. It's not that much of a difference in the economics of that. In the former, you're paying a public authority to deliver a better school, or maybe you're choosing a more educated peer group and you're going to have some gains from that, or you're going to private school. But that has a very segregating impact. Our media outlets are now all basically running to the poles of being distinguished as red or blue, right? I mean, there's, wonderful New Yorker cartoon with an elderly couple watching the weather and saying, well, now that we've watched the Democratic weather, let's tune into the Republican weather. And this is having, I think, a kind of vicious cyclical effect. Because if we think about our greatest challenges, and you click off your own challenges, whether you think we're at risk because the planet's getting too hot, or you're worried about violence abroad or at home, or you're worried about economic inequality, it's up to you to choose what challenges you think should be highest on our heat map of risk and promise and probability. But I think we could all acknowledge that if we're really divided, that is, if we don't know how to talk to one another across ideological or political divisions, we can't solve these problems. They require some form of collective action. And if we can't solve the problems, then there's frustration at not being able to solve the problems, which actually has an exacerbating effect on our polarization. Because we walk around upset about what the other side has done to us. And it's true now that I think people in our society are more passionate about what they're against than what they're for. In fact, surveys of parents show that parents are more afraid that their kids are going to marry someone of a different political party than they are of race, religion, and other historically significant social divisions. I mean, that's pretty astounding. I mean, from one point you say, well, that's a good thing, Hiram, because now, it's about real matters and not about, some sort of demographic identity. But I don't think it's a positive thing. And so then when you think about all of those social forces, as much as higher education has tried to keep itself within some kind of bubble, right? Having a campus, giving a pretense of impunity, there's nothing you can do wrong, it's all educational and so forth. As much as we created a bubble around ourselves, all of these forces are penetrating our world. And penetrating our world in ways where, and this is something I've experienced firsthand, where all of a sudden I'm no longer an educator. I am considered someone who can adjudicate these controversial issues. As if all of these controversies, people are now turning to college presidents to make statements, to sign petitions, to make big public announcements that I'm in favor of X or Y. I had some students come in to my office a few years ago saying, President Chodosh, we'd like you to sign this pledge. I was like, what does the pledge say? And they said, carbon has a price. And so I was in a kind of Socratic mood that day, and I said, well, tomatoes have a price. Well, why does this matter? Well, we think it's really important to get a whole bunch of college presidents, and then we're going to take this petition and go to Washington, and then we're going to see if we can get the petition to be the basis of some policy change. I said, well, you're talking about carbon tax or something like it. Yes. Well, why would I do that? Well, college presidents have always been at the forefront of major U.S. reforms. I said, no, they haven't. I said, name one. Name one. Couldn't name it. And I said, that's not because we don't have political thoughts or we're not interested in improving the human condition. That's not why we're not at the forefront. The reason we're not at the forefront is because we are educators. That is our role. We are not adjudicators. We are not lobbyists. We are not legislators. We're not the executive branch. That's someone else's role. Don't put me in a role where I have to choose sides and alienate half of my community. Because if I start making political pronouncements of a partisan nature, all of a sudden, the people who disagree with that shut down. They feel like, well, I don't know, president says, they don't know how to make that distinction. I could say, well, personally, I think this, but as a president, I'm not taking a view. That doesn't fly. People don't make those distinctions. I know a lot of federal judges who can't have a conversation because anything that they might say would be interpreted as predictive of something that they might do on the bench, right? And so that's sort of how I feel about our role. I have a statement that I'm about to release that John's actually helped me with, a statement of institutional nonpartisanship for higher ed. I think it's very, very important. And I'm not saying our faculty and students or families should be nonpartisan. You can be as partisan as you want. I'm just saying I'm the person who needs to be nonpartisan. So against this context of polarization, of these structural forces, of I would say the influence on higher ed and some of the things that I know you read about in the news, some of them anecdotal, some of them true, some of them exaggerated, about tendencies towards the polemic, tendencies towards the conclusory, tendencies towards being partisan, tendencies towards using the academic environment as a way of, producing a kind of political pressure on peers. That is a serious threat to what we do. Why is that? And I know we think about it in the political setting, but it's not just political. Leni Fukshansky gave a wonderful keynote address at our convocation just a couple days ago, in which he described one of Euclid's theories and how Euclid proved this theory by a method by contradiction. So, proving by contradiction. Those of you who studied sciences know that a lot of scientific proofs are the disproof of a null hypothesis, right? So in a lot of research and human inquiry, we use contradiction as a way of either affirming or not affirming the kinds of things that we're interested in exploring and the problems that we need to solve. So if I'm right that higher ed is kind of losing a little bit of its foundation because of these threats and because of the politicization that we're all trying to protect the academic freedom and academic environment from. So that, yes, we want our students and our faculty to have opinions, but we also want them to be challenged, and we want them to learn how to listen. We want them to learn how to debate with respect. We want them to learn how to find common ground and deeper levels of understanding. What is it that an institution like Claremont McKenna College should do? Now, I started with a couple of quotes that demonstrated that we're strong. We are very strong. I mean, forget the Ath Fellows. I'll take 10 students randomly chosen at CMC, randomly chosen, and I'll put them up against any 10 students anywhere in the country on this dimension: the appreciation of different opinions, of viewpoint diversity, of the skills that they want to acquire in order not just to disagree respectfully, but to actually see if they can reconcile the disagreements that they have. So we're already strong. I could put my feet up. That's not what we're doing. We, first of all, need to redouble our commitments. Why? Because there are still continuous threats. You saw this a couple years ago when, a lot of the other campuses spilled into ours to shut down an event at the Athenaeum. We had a few students, certainly to be honest, I'm not externalizing responsibility for that in any respect, but we are also vulnerable to external influences on our campus. And it comes, folks, from both sides. There are very conservative groups that join with students to conduct counteractivism. There are very progressive groups that work with students to generate activism on campuses. Don't think that it's all just happening within a campus. And so we're kind of at times a playing field for these battles to be played out, okay? So there's vulnerability there. We have to be super resilient. And that means each and every one of our students has to develop the skill set, the ethos that Bruno and Hamza have. So how do we do that? So first, yes, there's policy. Yes, there's the president's rhetoric. That's important. We put a tremendous amount of effort into clarifying as much as we can without turning ourselves into some sort of Prussian code, the basic principles and situations. Check out our Freedom of Expression website. There's a wonderful FAQ. There's a lot of resources, and you'll find all of our policies there. That's very important. But in order to actually do this well, it can't really just stop with policy. We have to take our educational imperatives seriously. What do I mean by that? Let me give you this example. I was at, last year, a conference convened by the American Council on Education, ACE, on freedom of speech and inclusion. And I spent the 3 hours there in an incredibly frustrated frame of mind because almost all of this discussion was about administrative intervention in a crisis. And to some extent, that's understandable because when we think about freedom of speech in the country, we think about vertical interventions. Congress shall make no law, right? And we tend not to think about our horizontal relationships and how we speak and listen to one another. That's understandable. It's also understandable that the conference was about crisis management because there have been a lot of crises. So I raised my hand and I said, folks, I understand that why hospitals need emergency rooms, but that's not health. And we need to put our attention on the educational imperatives, the horizontal relationships of person to person, of group to group. And we need to develop a national curriculum, and I mean curriculum in the broadest sense, that actually reinforces the values of freedom of speech, of viewpoint diversity, and of effective dialogue. Now, freedom of speech on its own isn't really that valuable. Yes, we should all be able to go off into the corner and vent without interference. But what does that do? It doesn't persuade anyone unless it's engaged. And viewpoint diversity alone is insufficient. Oh, it's great to have a variety of viewpoints. But if they're not engaged, what's the point? It starts to look like the Monty Python skit I loved when I was young. You know, the one where the guy comes in and says, I'd like to have an argument, please. No, you don't. I mean, I'm frustrated with some of my peers around the country who have articulated respectful disagreement as the primary telos of education. It's not. We are not here just to disagree better. That is not why I'm in education. Disagreement is fundamental to agreement, but the underlying purpose is to get deeper levels of understanding. George Mitchell once said to me that leadership is about the reconciliation of divergent forces in society. We could also say it's about the reconciliation of colliding forces in society. That's what we should be doing. So what we are doing at CMC is also including in this triad of commitments effective dialogue. And what I mean by that are all the things that bring people together to engage in debate, but also to solve complex problems. What does that skill set look like? And so in addition to articulating these commitments, what we've done with the board is to form a new initiative that for now we're calling the Open Academy. And just to have a kind of housing, a framework for thinking about these three very important objectives: freedom of expression, viewpoint diversity, and effective dialogue. And on freedom of expression, of course, yes, Chicago principles, our microsite, we're the first liberal arts college and the first college in California to get a green rating from the organization FIRE for our freedom of speech policies. That's all very important. Viewpoint diversity. First, the ideological composition of our faculty, and John's written a great book about this called Passing on the Right, right? Is that that's the title? About the trends, and rather tragic trends of, especially in certain fields, of there being no true ideological diversity in the academy. That's a big problem. We're blessed with ours at CMC, but it's something to be cherished and protected. But it's not just the composition of the faculty, it's what the faculty does in the classroom. The materials from which they teach, the people they bring in who have different opinions than their own. To use John's example again, he developed a really interesting grant program where faculty can have guests who have actually written the book that the students are studying come into the classroom or come in by Skype. And often with very divergent political perspectives on the materials. It's our Athenaeum and everything that happens there. Last year we had a couple of programs where we tried to put either a moderated dialogue together or back-to-back speakers. So we had a great Palestinian scholar, followed by a great Israeli scholar focused on the Middle East. And then we told students if they attended both events, they could go to a moderated panel, group discussion with faculty and other facilitators to share their perspectives on what they learned from hearing both perspectives. One of our great student groups, podcast group that I've supported and that my wife Priya, whom you know is the director of the Athenaeum, called Free Food for Thought, interviews some of our Athenaeum speakers, and their whole methodology is to interview them on the inflection points of their personal and professional contributions. Not only what did you do, but why did you do what you did? And it's called Free Food for Thought. They've got a wonderful website. And many people who have come through the Athenaeum have told us that it was probably the best interview they ever had. And then effective dialogue. Now we do, 2-3 hour session for every first year student that arrives. A real training in dialogue. This year, it was just off the charts. And all of our first year guides, where we have about 70 first year guides who mentor students during the obligatory wilderness programs the first week of school. They're all trained in all kinds of emergency management, all kinds of things, orienting students to bring them in school. They actually were very involved in the dialogue, so they get trained. The best way to learn things is to teach them. And so we have that with the Care Center and all of its programs. One of our great staff, Nerea Gray, and I have developed a module that we tested last year. Actually, it was something that we developed in conjunction with the student podcast group to develop a module on freedom of speech and dialogue. What we did was we took a Supreme Court case from 1972 that was about a president who disallowed a student organization because of their association with a national group, and the national group statements about what was important. And the Supreme Court remanded, so we had the students absorb the case, Socratically understand the principles of the case and how they apply to the facts. Then we took a case, similar case that we had had on our campus, and we put students in groups to resolve the matter themselves so that it wouldn't require an administrative intervention, or no less, a Supreme Court hearing. And that's something we're going to test and roll out to all of our leadership groups this year. So with the Claremont commitments, with the Open Academy, what can we do together? What can you do? Well, you can critique the living daylights out of it. Tear it apart. Challenge each and everything I said tonight. We'll send you the white paper on it. Provide comments. Tell me where I'm wrong. Second, once you're convinced, champion it. Talk about it. Talk to peers about it. Talk to people who are worried about what's going on in the country to find some beacon of hope and promise that some of us are out there working this hard and reaching some level of accomplishment demonstrated by, again, the students and their special qualities of character and their high performance skill level on this particular set of challenges. Tell us your story when you were at CMC about what you learned from these kinds of academic interventions. Come see it for yourself. I mean, I always tell alumni that I'm an alum too. We're all like Rip Van Winkle. You know, we have a certain image of our school that's etched in our brains based on the 4 years we spent there. That's natural. I often think that parents actually have a much better sense of what's happening at the college than our alumni do. That's also natural. When my kids were in college, one just graduated, I know a lot more about what's happening at those schools than I do about my alma mater. So come see it, come engage, come to the Ath one night, look at the calendar. It's an amazing lineup this year. And a very politically diverse lineup, I would add. Support it financially. We are going to raise money to support this, and we're going to make a big deal out of it. And join us in our strategic thinking. You know, be a co-author. be a co-producer. Give us ideas that we don't have, or disabuse us of the ones that we do. So I want to thank you for coming tonight, for your shared commitment to the college to prepare this generation for its world of affairs, and to work with us to test, to challenge, to improve the underlying working theories and the effectiveness of the practical applications of these investments and interventions. So I want to thank you for coming tonight, and I'd love to take some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Chodosh. If you have a question, raise your hand, and I will bring the microphone around.
I could hear you talk for many more hours, by the way, but that won't be allowed tonight. What you're saying resonates beautifully today, and I'm not so sure it would have resonated 10 years ago. But how does CMC get the word out to the nation about what we're doing here as a model for how we should be behaving as a society?
I mean, I mentioned the Chicago principles. I mean, I applaud what Chicago's done. It's always been a leader, and not just as a matter of policy, because I know, my own experience there and my colleagues, like, you go in to give a faculty talk at Chicago and it's a round table and you get ripped apart. Like, they walk the walk. I've admired their ability to establish their reputation for this. And that's why I call this the Claremont McKenna commitments. So we have the Chicago principles. Principles are important. But we're doers too. And I think that we have a real opportunity to make the Claremont McKenna commitments mean at least as much, but probably more than the Chicago principles mean. Chicago principles, they just go into a resolution, into policy. I mean, when the Chicago principles came online, one of our faculty members stood up at a faculty meeting and said, I think we should resolve as a faculty to endorse the Chicago principles. And I raised my hand and I said, are the Chicago principles in any substantial way different than what we currently have at Claremont McKenna College? And the answer was, no, Hiram. And I'm thinking to myself, why are we going to endorse them then? A couple years later, there was an article in the newspaper, and one of our life trustees came to the board and said, there's a list of schools that's endorsed the Chicago principles, and we're not on that list. Why aren't we on the list? Well, we didn't make a big deal out of the endorsement of the Chicago principles. So the board endorsed the Chicago principles. I said, all right, is it that we're insecure, that our own principles aren't as important as the Chicago principles? I was okay with it. So, but still, it's impressive that they got that kind of reputational effect. And I think we can do that with the Claremont McKenna commitments, because I don't think anyone is as well positioned as we to not just articulate the commitments, but to show evidence of their effectuation. But I need help with that. I mean, all of you are our ambassadors, and some of you are very much more sophisticated than I about public relations and how to make an impact on the public mind through media and other types of channels. So we need some help there too.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. I like the principles you've talked about. One of the things that you alluded to was, I think, testing. One of the things you were applying. How would you test, and what criteria would you use to say that the dialogue has been effective?
Well, it's, this is something that we're going to figure out when we do this. We try to scale out these workshops, but typically I think what you do is you look at, one way to do it is you look at the outcome of the solution. Like, did the group come to a solution? Now, there are good solutions and bad solutions, right? One of my good friends, Chief Judge Wallace, who was in the Ninth Circuit, used to tell me that, Hiram, even a bad settlement is better than a good judgment. I was like, no, Cliff, that is not right. I don't agree with that. Like, I'm a big proponent of mediation, but that is just wrong, Cliff. So you can have solutions that are bad. I mean, some solutions may violate other principles. But I think we can distinguish. So going back to the example I used, if you have a student org that's trying to establish itself and there's a controversy around it, and you're looking at now, instead of an administrator like me coming in and resolving it, you're looking at what the students are able to learn and work through on their own and what kind of resolution they come to on their own in a student-centric way. You can tell the difference. I mean, one of our greatest, I think, assets at CMC is our commitment to student research, to their own freedom of inquiry, to what we would call student centricity. Our students arrive not just to absorb what we know. I mean, the world's changing too fast to have that kind of model in higher education. It used to be education was all about the older generation conveying to the younger generation the knowledge of the day. Well, that's okay. We have a lot to teach and a lot to convey, but knowledge is changing really fast. And we want our students to ask the critical questions that challenge the basis of our knowledge. I mean, I mentioned Euclid. Well, someone looked at Euclid's axioms and they decided, what if we got rid of the fifth one? What if we got rid of the fourth one? And all of a sudden you had two completely different worldviews based on two alternative non-Euclidean geometries. That's good. We wouldn't have a lot of modern science without someone having questioned one of Euclid's axioms. And we need to learn from that and empower our students with our guidance to be able to determine their own learning agenda, to understand that these big complex problems won't get solved unless we learn what we need to learn to solve them. And so it's not just, Professor X, we're done, we came to a resolution. It's how they work through it and how they listen to one another and what their process is and whether they're actually using the principles that have so brilliantly guided free societies, right? Principles of not just freedom to do whatever you want, but principles that have mutual constraints so that one person's freedom does not violate another's. Very difficult thing to work out in a complex, diverse society. And the more we turn those wheels over to our students to make mistakes, to experiment, and to develop the skill set that they need to sustain our society, to lead through these polarizing times, the better off we'll all be. And I think we can see the difference.
Thank you, President Chodosh. We still have some time to enjoy dessert and, of course, the beautiful outdoors. The bar is currently open. Professor Shields, I'm sure would enjoy some lively conversation. Of course, President Chodosh will answer any further questions, and you can always talk to any of the staff that are here as well. Yes.
I just offer, John, you have any closing words that you'd like to convey about what we're doing? I mean, John, look, John's on the front. John's on the front line of this work.
No, it's hard to follow Hiram because he's so eloquent, and I've had a couple of drinks. So I guess just by way of introduction, I'll just say a couple things about the work I do and the kinds of courses that I teach. So this semester, I'm co-teaching a course with Phil Zuckerman, who's a sociologist at Pitzer College, and it's on the topic is free speech. So we're just assigning books by authors who've been disinvited from college campuses. And it's called the University Blacklist, and they're from, and the books are from across the political spectrum too. So there's everyone from Angela Davis, to Charles Murray, and of course Heather McDonald is on the list. She's the final book that we'll read this semester. And then Phil and I have different politics too. So I'm moderately conservative, and Phil is not. He's a sociologist at Pitzer, and so he's yeah, right. Yeah, and so our practice is to the book whose politics we're most proximate. So in cases when I'm most proximate to the author that we're assigning I'll lecture on the book and offer a defense of it, Phil will critique it, and then we'll switch places. So, you know, when Angela Davis is assigned, he'll defend it and I'll critique it. Unfortunately, I have to defend Milo, so that's on my agenda this semester. And partly it's, I think, just to model disagreement in part. But also, I think one of the insights of social psychology is that we're all better at defending positions that we have some sympathy for. And so I'm defending the authors I have no sympathy for, and he's, and then on the other hand, we're good at critiquing views that we disagree with. And so we're taking advantage of those differences. I think just finally, and I guess I've got a lot to say about all these things, but just I won't take up much time, but I think that one thing that really struck us both about this course is that we had a very long list of seniors who wanted to get into the class and didn't. And we've never had that experience. We're both well-regarded professors at our respective colleges, and that's just never happened to us. So I think that speaks well of the students, that there's a lot of interest and demand and to both explore controversial ideas and a great interest in free speech at the moment. We hope there's more of that, right? Co-teaching in the Claremont colleges with professors of different views. It doesn't all have to be, hot button political issues like we're doing. I mean, I know that, there are professors with different interests, different perspectives on Shakespeare, right? Or any number of topics. But because there is some political diversity, of course, at the Claremont colleges, and especially at CMC, I think we're in a unique position, perhaps, to do some co-teaching, and that would make us, I think, pretty distinctive in lots of ways. This is not done much anywhere else. At Princeton, there's one course, I think Robert George, who's a conservative Catholic, teaches with Cornell West, but I think more of that could be done here.
Excellent. I should say that we also received a grant from the Mellon Foundation to diversify not only compositionally faculty, but to diversify the kinds of teaching that we do. So that allows for co-teaching arrangements, again, over certain types of disciplinary or other types of borders or boundaries. And we're seeking to put all this together in a well-fused, complementary set of programs that sort of capture the imagination of our community, and we hope, by example, can have an impact on the rest of higher ed and the rest of the country. So John's just been one of our fearless leaders in this respect and has done some very courageous things in the classroom. And we're really pleased to have him and to support the kind of work that he and so many of our CMCU faculty are doing. So we should all be very, very proud of them and the commitment of our students to those kinds of learning environments. So again, we're around. Let's continue the conversation. You know where to find me. You can always send me a note, and we'd love to see you on campus and certainly here frequently. So thank you very much for your attention.